Hermvids with Mr. Herman. Educational videos about reading and writing. So, true story, when I was in 8th grade, I was at a public pool, and I was swimming along, and across the pool I saw one of the cutest girls in class waving at me. So I waved back with a goofy grin on my face, and then she kind of waved more frantically, and then I waved back more frantically, and then I realized she wasn't waving at all. She was telling me to get out of the way because there was a diver above me who was coming directly in my direction and hit me in the head. That is what's called the usable past, where you take something from your past and you transform it into a story. And today I'm going to teach you how to do that for fiction writing. The usable past is an idea that explains another way to generate story ideas. And it goes back to one of those original quotes that I talked about from Mark Twain, "Write what you know." You take items from your past and you use them and mold them to fit your fiction stories. The usable past is an idea that you can mine your past for good stories and character ideas. Here are some ways to tap into your past and use it in your writing. This is from a show called Freaks and Geeks, which is set in 1980, and the creators used parts of their own past to tell the stories of these characters of freaks and geeks. It's a great show. So one way to do this is through childhood, and what I mean by that is you go back to your moments growing up and find people you remember, events happening, places, and use those to form the basis, or at least a part of, a fiction tale that you're writing. Here's a quote from Flannery O'Connor, a great writer. The fact is that anybody who has survived his childhood has enough information about life to last him the rest of his days. If you can't make something out of a little experience, you probably won't be able to make it out of a lot. What she's saying there is that you should be able to find significance, even if your childhood was quote-unquote boring. You should be able to find significance in those little moments. Maybe you didn't have a boring childhood. There was momentous moments. Maybe it's a little bit easier to find meaning there. But what she's saying is if you've gone through childhood, you have enough there to form some sort of some narrative. There's a lot from childhood that can be tapped for storytelling. Whether it's childhood trauma, embarrassment, or love, these are the types of stories that are compelling, and it's a great way to add elements of realism to your tales. Another way to do this is through thinking of place. Your usable past can be the places that you've seen or encountered. Many writers first start with a place that they want to set their story in. Charles Dickens was famous for focusing around an area of London that he set many of his stories in. William Faulkner invented his own town that was based on a town from the middle of America. This is a great way to kind of form the narrative world that you're creating. Once you decide on that place, a vibe for the place is created by populating it with characters. Characters that fit the tone, the feeling of this place that you're trying to set your story in. Many authors use places that they grew up in or that they have visited. Herman Melville traveled around the world on a whaling vessel, and that gave him plenty of information for his books like Billy Budd and Moby Dick. So it helps if you've been there before, it helps if you experience them, and you can use that as the basis for a story. Another way to think of this usable past is through unresolved emotion. So we've all experienced the feelings of love, anger, and jealousy before. They're great places to start when creating a story. So you think of a character's motivation, and we've all experienced these things, whether we care to admit them or not. So you can use them as the basis to motivate your character forward. Maybe your character has just entered a new relationship, and jealousy has taken over them, and that guides what they do throughout your story. Think of your own experiences with these emotions, and it'll add more truth to what you're writing about. It'll propel your stories along in a way that compels your readers and is interesting. Speaking of truth, this is a concept introduced by Tim O'Brien in his book the things they carried. And he introduces this idea of storytelling truth versus happening truth. And it's a great way to think of the usable past. These two truths happen in storytelling like this. There's the happening truth, which is what actually happened to the author. If their story is based on Vietnam, like Tim O'Brien's story, that's the part that he went through as a human being. Then there's something called the storytelling truth, which is a story that feels true. Maybe it feels like it could have actually happened, but it's not factually true. Tim O'Brien used his own name as a character in the story, so it feels true that way, but it wasn't actually true. He didn't actually do some of the things he wrote about. It should have what's called emotional truth to it, though. So your real emotion of excitement from winning a competition should be true in both versions of this storytelling truth. So it's a way to base your usable past. It's a way to take that and to transform it into something more fiction narrative feeling. It makes for a fascinating story generally too. Here's how we're going to practice your usable past. I want you to take a story that's happened to you, and I want you to combine it, the happening truth, the happening part of the story, to the storytelling truth. So what you're going to do is you're going to write part of the story as what actually happened, what quite literally you remember as facts. Then you're going to inject what's called the storytelling truth, which can over-exaggerate or overemphasize the facts. It can add totally new elements in or take them out. But the goal should be to make the story feel emotionally true throughout.